Chapter 271 Insurmountable. The massive pillar plummeted down and fell right on the Black Knight. The devil turned slightly at the last moment, lowering his sword to the ground. His crimson eyes flashed with unassailable menace. As a thunderous crash resounded in the dark hall of the ruined cathedral, pieces of stone and clouds of dust flew into the air. "Got you!" A feeling of savage joy ignited in Sunny's heart. Without slowing down, he dove into the dust. Of course, he didn't think the fiend would be destroyed by his trap, but it had to do some damage to the fearsome black armor at least. Nearing the place where he had last seen the tall dark figure, Sunny witnessed an incredible sight. The pillar was floating high above the ground, its crushing weight resting on the shoulder of the steel giant. In the place of the impact, its surface had cracked and shattered. The Black Knight, however, had not escaped unscathed as well. His heavy breastplate fractured, revealing nothing but a mass of impenetrable, living darkness within. The pauldron on the shoulder that had received the blow was practically destroyed, leaving that whole arm hanging listlessly, twisted at a strange angle. The helmet of the devil was dented and covered by a net of small cracks, each seeping with ghostly crimson light. The Black Knight did not look good, if utterly terrifying. What was even better, though, was the fact that he was currently stuck under the pillar, unable to move. Sunny had to take us out of that situation. But before he could, the devil raised his broken arm and placed it on the column. Then he lowered his head as though gathering his strength, and effortlessly threw the monumental stone pillar into the air. Sunny's eyes widened. Diving down, he barely avoided the flying wall of granite. The pillar flew above his head and crashed down onto the marble floor, then rolled several times and came to a rest in a deafening rumble of shattering stone. Its length blocked the grand hall, cutting the way for the rest of the cohort. And also Sunny's path of retreat. Not that he had any plans of retreating. Regaining his balance, Sunny brandished the midnight shard and dashed toward the wounded Black Knight for a vicious attack. Both he and the stone saint arrived at the same time. However, the fallen devil was still a force to be reckoned with. Despite the fact that his armor was cracked and his speed was somewhat diminished, there was still enough power in his body to obliterate all of them. Holding the great sword with one hand, he suddenly pulled it into a fearsome slash. The black blade whistled through the air, cutting a chaotic arc around the fiend. Sunny was forced to jump back, but the shadow managed to deflect the blow with her shield and redirect its power, slowing down only a little. In the next moment, she closed the distance to the Black Knight and delivered a terrible strike of her own, aiming at the base of his sword's blade. The knight simply moved the sword away, then violently bashed her in the head with the pommel, casing bits of the stone-like metal to fly into the air. The saint staggered back, the visor of her helmet shattered. Unlike the mass of darkness hiding in the black suit of steel armor, there was an actual face beneath hers. Sunny allowed himself to stare for a fraction of a second. This was his first time seeing the face of his shadow, after all. The stone saint looked just how he had imagined. Her skin was gray like granite, and the features of her face were almost like that of a human, with the exception that they were just too flawless. It was as though she had not been born, but actually cut from stone by a mad sculptor, one obsessed with absolute perfection. As the result, what should have been beautiful looked eerie and hideous instead. In fact, glancing at the inhumanly perfect face of his shadow, Sunny felt nothing but a cold sense of revulsion, fright even. The fact that her haunting face was utterly devoid of any hint of human emotion only made it even more disturbing. The shadow caught herself from falling and dashed to the side, avoiding another strike from the terrifying giant, which was effortlessly chained after the first one. The great sword fell down once more, shattering the marble plates of the floor in the spot she had been just a moment ago. It was then that Nephice rejoined the fight. The three of them attacked the Black Knight simultaneously, perfectly coordinating their assault. Changing Star threw her long sword forward, aiming to sever the broken arm of the devil entirely. The stone saint went after the great sword again, and Sunny did something crazy, dashing to the enormous black blade. He stepped on its surface and ran up, using it as a ladder. He had a solid second of stability before the greatsword was pulled into another attack. Feeling it moving beneath his feet, Sunny used the momentum to jump up and grab onto the helmet of the terrifying fiend. Mounting the devil, he hung from the Black Knight's neck and delivered a savage stab at his shoulder. His aim was just a centimeter away from the edge of the pauldron. Sunny's hand was empty when he started the strike, but by the time it reached its mark, the moon shard was already grasped in it. During their journey back to the Dark City, he had noticed that Ascended memories received a less dramatic enhancement from the Crown of Dawn. Unlike the awakened ones, they weren't elevated by almost an entire rank in terms of power. The augmentation, however, was still significant. Enough to breach the gap between the ghostly stiletto and the armor of the fallen devil, at least. The needle-sharp point of the moon shard broke through the impenetrable steel and sunk deep into the shoulder joint of the indestructible black armor. Obviously, Sunny knew that this strike would not do a lot of damage to the fiend. But dealing damage was not his goal. Devil or not, fallen or not, the Black Knight still had to obey the laws of physics. In particular, having several inches of steel glass stuck in the joint of his armor was inevitably going to reduce the mobility of his arm. Indeed, with both of his arms damaged, the speed with which the fiend was able to move his greatsword around considerably diminished. It was still utterly terrifying, nevertheless, but not insurmountable anymore. Just a moment faster than the Black Knight, the stone saint stepped over the black blade and pinned it to the floor with one of her greaves. Using all of her weight to keep it down, she threw her sword aside and raised her shield high above her head with both hands. Then. For a moment time slowed down. And then the shadow brought the shield down, delivering a devastating blow to the weakest point of the greatsword. The rim of the stone shield hit against the black steel, and with a deafening ringing, the great sword shattered. Chapter 272 Shadow and Darkness. Augmented by the shadow and with the help of 900 fragments that Sunny had collected, the saint had become incredibly strong. The graceful stone body of the taciturn monster hid incredible power to begin with, and now it was vastly enhanced. Holding her shield with both hands, the shadow delivered a devastating blow at the weakest point of the black blade. The blade, which was pinned between the marble floor and her greave, rang deafeningly and shattered. Still mounting the Black Knight, Sunny grinned with vicious joy. Then, he let go of the dented helmet of the devil and pushed himself off, performing a backward flip and landing nimbly several meters away. Nephice immediately disengaged too. Both of them knew that nothing was more dangerous than an enemy on the brink of death. With nothing to lose, humans often relinquished any sense of self-preservation and turned berserk, taking their killer with them to the grave. Nightmare creatures were much the same, only more terrifying. Despite the fact that Sunny was sure that the devil's weakness hid in his sword, he wasn't certain what would happen if the blade was actually broken. Hopefully, the Black Knight would just crumble into a pile of steel. If not, it would be better to be far away when they found out. As the shards of the black blade rained on the floor and the stone saint fell on one knee, a shudder ran through the devil's body. The darkness hiding in the corners of the ruined cathedral suddenly boiled and lunged forward in a wave. But none of it reached the Black Knight, annihilated by the radiance of changing stars' intricate white armor. The devil froze in a twisted pose, his hands powerlessly hanging down, his back bent. The black steel of his armor was rusting. It was swiftly turning dull brown, its luster gone, its once impregnable surface looking corroded and brittle. Then, he slowly and laboriously raised his head and turned it slightly to the side, as if staring at the face of the nameless goddess whose statue oversaw the dark hall of the ruined cathedral for thousands of years. As the devil looked at the goddess, the crimson light of his eyes slowly weakened and dimmed, and then suddenly exploded into furious red flames. The rusty armor came apart, exposing the mass of darkness hiding within. The darkness stretched its limbs and rose above the kneeling shadow, the parts of the armor that floated in it giving the creature a vaguely humanoid shape. Revealing its true form, a ghostly colossus made of darkness and rusting steel towered above the taciturn monster like an omen of death, two crimson fires burning furiously in the black depths. Another flame appeared just beneath them, like a twisted mouth made from the flames of hell. And then a terrifying roar shook the ancient temple. Sunny took an involuntary step back, a feeling of dread rising from the depths of his soul. His eyes searched for Nephis and found her standing a few meters behind the stone saint. Changing Star was hesitating, looking at the dark apparition with an uncertain expression. She caught his gaze, lingered for a moment, and then nodded, understanding what Sunny wanted to convey without the need for any words. Then Nephis cautiously backed away, not letting the devil out of her sight. What was going to happen next was not something a human could survive. Not a sleeper, at least. With a harrowing fury, the creature of darkness crashed down on the shadow. Its hands tore through the air and wrapped around the taciturn monster's neck, then raised the living statue in the air as if her stone body weighed nothing. The devil brought the saint high above the marble floor of the ruined cathedral and squeezed her neck, as if trying to strangle her. A net of cracks streaked through the shadow's armor, bits of stone falling down. Through all of it, the emotionless expression on the hauntingly inhuman face of the saint did not change one bit. But in her ruby eyes, a hint of a feeling appeared, much stronger than ever before. Velt disdain. Letting go of the shield, she raised her hands, grasped the vambraces of the rusting armor, and easily shattered them in her grip. As another roar resounded in the darkness, the taciturn monster fell back to the ground. Landing with nimble grace, she instantly dodged the claws of the apparition, which had bent down to shatter the living statue once and for all. Then she took a step forward. The stone saint was right beneath the leaning devil now. As her ruby eyes flashed with ruthlessness, she lunged forward and delivered a crushing blow to his chest. Her gauntlet tore through the breastplate of the rusted armor and sank deep into the living darkness, right where a human heart would have been. Or a soul core. A moment later, the crimson flames burning in the depths of the dark creature exploded into a wave of blinding red light, and disappeared. The dark essence of the devil dissipated like fog, its remnants vanquished by Changing Star's radiance. The pieces of armor fell to the ground in a clangor of steel. The terrifying devil of the cathedral, the Black Knight, was dead. Sunny threw his head back and let out an exhilarated, vengeful laugh. Die, you bastard. Die and go to hell forever. Oh, revenge tasted so great. A moment later, the voice of the spell whispered sweetly into his ear. You have slain a fallen devil, forsaken knight. Your shadow grows stronger. Sunny smiled. Anything else you want to add? A memory. An echo. However, a moment later he forgot all about the spell. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Because right in front of him, something very strange was happening to the stone saint. Her hand was still raised, frozen in the same position as when she had pierced the heart of the living darkness with her fist. And in it, what the hell is that thing? Chapter 273 Chrysalis. Grasped in the shadow's fist was a strange, beautiful, and ominous gem. It was utterly black, as though suffused with impenetrable darkness. The glossy black surface seemed to devour light, turning the vast hall of the ruined cathedral even darker than it had been before. Deep within that black void, crimson flames burned with a menacing red glow. It was pulsating in a slow and bizarre rhythm, drowning everything around in dim red light. Painted by it, the stone saint seemed to be drenched in blood. The gem she held looked like a bloody, still-beating heart that she had torn out of someone's chest. Gazing at it, Sunny felt a strange sense of foreboding. What the hell is this thing? The gem looked sort of like a soul shard, but different. He had never seen a black shard to begin with, or one radiating such an intense glow. It also didn't seem like a piece of a broken core. On the contrary, it appeared whole. Is that what a soul core of a nightmare creature looks like? No, not a soul core. Soul. Stunned, Sunny counted the crimson flames burning in the depths of the black gem. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 flames for the 4 cores of fallen devil. The thing that his shadow held in her hand was the Black Knight's soul, or some sort of his essence at least. By how had it turned into a material form? Did the stone saint do it? So how know why? What is she doing with it? As Sunny and Nephi's looked in stunned silence, the shadow finally moved. Bringing the black gem close to her face, she lingered for a moment. A hint of a dark, macabre emotion appeared in her eyes. And then the stone saint swallowed it. Sunny blinked. What? The shadow opened her mouth, bit into the eerie crystal and swallowed it. Just like that, the soul of the Black Knight was devoured. The red glow it emanated disappeared, returning the world to its natural shade. And a moment after that, the stone saint fell into the shadows and disappeared too. Wait, I didn't dismiss her. What the hell is happening? Nephis looked at him with a perplexed expression. What just happened? What did she do? For once, Sunny didn't have to twist the truth and deceive anyone. Opening his mouth, he honestly said, I have no idea. Walking over to the pile of rusty steel that remained after the devil had been destroyed, Sunny moved it around with his foot for a bit and then mumbled. There's no shards left. It's empty. Changing Star remained silent for a few moments, then frowned. Finally she said, Your echo is very peculiar. While everyone was recovering from the fight and tending to their wounds, Sunny walked to a secluded corner and dove into the soul sea. The tranquil expanse of still water met him with familiar silence. Glancing at the rows of motionless shadows standing at the edge of it, Sunny noticed that the Black Knight had joined their ranks. The steel giant stood among all the other creatures Sunny had slain, just as empty as the rest of them. There was no trace of the menacing and deadly fallen devil left. Now he was just one of the shadows. Sunny grinned. Welcome, you bastard. Make yourself at home. You're not going anywhere else ever anyway. A feeling of deep, dark satisfaction grasped his heart. Staring at the motionless form of his sworn enemy, Sunny had to stop himself from kicking the Black Knight with all his strength. He was just a shadow now after all. Kicking him would have been like kicking the air. Plus, Sunny wasn't vindictive to that degree. Killing the bastard once was enough for him. Who's the one laughing now, huh? I won't deny it, you got me good. But I'm still breathing while you're dead. At the end of the day, that's all that matters. This world. No, both this world and the real one was full of creatures that were bigger, stronger, and more powerful than Sunny. Many of them had either threatened his existence or felt compelled to treat him like dirt to show their superiority. But he was still here despite all of them, neither destroyed nor subjugated. He was free, alive, and growing stronger with each day. One day, they would be the ones cowering in front of him or be destroyed by him, just like the Black Knight had been. With a dark expression, Sunny turned away and walked to stand beneath the black sun of his shadow core. Then he summoned the stone saint. But nothing happened. Sunny frowned, then repeated the summon again, to the same effect. Suddenly worried, he willed the runes to appear in the air in front of him. Luckily, his worst fears did not come true. The stone saint was still listed as his shadow. Then what is going on with her? Concentrating on the runes describing her name, Sunny made it expand and read. Shadow Stone Saint. Shadow rank. Awakened. Shadow class. Monster. Shadow attributes. Battlemaster. Stalwart. Spark of divinity. Shadow description. Shadow Saint was created by the treacherous lost from light in the cursed darkness of the forgotten shore. Shadow fragments. 80/200. So far everything was the same. Even the number of shadow fragments he had fed her did not change. However, there was a new string of runes shimmering beneath that number, where nothing had been before. When Sunny saw it, his eyes widened. The runes read, "The Stone Saint is evolving." He lingered for a few moments, and then looked up at the shadow core. P.D.N. Vel somewhere inside. His shadow was resting in the waves of nurturing dark flames, her very being going through a mysterious transformation. It appeared as though consuming the soul of the Black Knight had allowed her to enter a stage of growth that Sunny had not anticipated. How long would that evolution process take? And what kind of a transformation the saint was going through? Sunny had no idea. However, he couldn't wait to find out. Chapter 274 Salvation. Evolving. The stone saint was evolving. Leaving the mindscape of the soul sea, Sunny furrowed his brow. His eyes, however, were full of excitement. What exactly about her was going to change, though? There weren't that many possibilities. It could be either her rank, her class, or her attributes. It was logical to assume that by defeating an opponent of a higher rank, the shadow would be able to ascend to a new rank herself. However, there was a flaw in that logic. The Black Knight wasn't the first fallen creature Sunny and the Saint had slain. In fact, he was the third, with the Corpse Eater and the Spire Messenger being the first two. That's not even counting the 2 iron spiders the living statue had butchered before falling to Sunny's blade herself. But she had not done anything like pulling a black gem out of their corpses before. So, most likely, what allowed her to absorb the soul of that particular nightmare creature was not the mere fact of its incredible power. It was the strange but obvious kinship that the two of them shared. At least Sunny felt that this guess of his was right. That didn't help him understand what changes would occur to the taciturn monsters, though. Still, it was a very valuable piece of information to learn. In the future, if Sunny wanted to evolve his shadows, he would have to find not only a powerful but also a suitable opponent for them to defeat. A kindred abomination of higher rank or class. Tilting his head, he tried to remember if there was another creature on the forgotten shore he knew of whose soul could be fed to the saint. For a moment, the image of the walking colossus appeared in his mind. Yeah, no. Not gonna even think about that. Shaking his head, Sunny smiled slightly and walked over to his companions. Now that their deal had been concluded, the future he was so afraid of was finally upon them. The light of lanterns invaded the spacious room that had once belonged to the priestess of this ancient temple. With 6 people entering its peaceful haven, however, it didn't seem so vast anymore. Sunny looked around and sighed. The hidden quarters were just like he had left him. There were pieces of simple but luxurious furniture carved out of pale wood, with a few mismatched things that he had scavenged from the ruins. The stone walls were decorated with intricate engravings. An empty chest that used to be full of shimmering soul shards stood dark and empty. Feeding the stone saint had really bankrupted him. Sadly, being the master of a hungry shadow was not the cheapest of ambitions. On one of the walls, sets of lines were scratched into the stone, marking all the days he had spent living in the ruined cathedral. For a long time this had been his home. The best home he ever had, really. Which was a sad thing to say about a windowless stone room hidden in the middle of a cursed city. But Sunny liked it a lot. He was going to miss this dark, quiet place very much. The other members of the cohort, with the exception of Effie and Cassie, were looking around with interest. Even Neff showed a bit of curiosity. With a strange look on his face, Kai turned to Sunny and asked, This is where you lived?" Sunny raised an eyebrow and shrugged. "Yeah. Why?" The beautiful archer smiled with visible delight. "No, nothing. It's just that. This place is so tasteful. I did not expect your residence to be this chic." "What is that supposed to mean?" Sunny frowned. "What did you expect it to be?" Kai looked down, suddenly flustered. "Oh, for some reason I always imagined you sleeping on a floor in a cave." "Yeah, stupid, I know. Why would there be a cave in a temple?" Hearing that, Effie couldn't help but laugh. Wait till you see what's in his closet, Knight." Sunny gave her a menacing look but thought better of saying anything. He understood that the huntress was just trying to lighten the mood. Knowing what was going to come next, every member of the cohort was consumed by fear and doubt right now. Effie more than the rest, because her role in the spectacle that Gunnalug had planned for them was especially cruel. Sunny sighed. A bit later, they were sitting around the hearth, the smell of food still lingering in the air. Everyone was silent, looking at the fire, their minds consumed with dark thoughts. Sunny knew that he had to make a decision now, but felt reluctant to do so. Instead, he just watched the shadows dance on the walls of the hidden chamber. After a while, Nephice finally broke the silence. Turning to him, she lingered for a bit and then asked, "We will be leaving in the morning. Will you come with us?" Her voice sounded even as always. But Sunny knew her well enough to discern notes of a suppressed emotion in it. Oh, hope is the poison that will get you killed. But no, this was the old Sunny talking. One who was comfortable hiding behind his insanity. One who had given up. Who was too afraid to face the ruthless truth and pay the price to take what belonged to him. Was his by right. Triumph, salvation, and hope. Sunny was done being afraid. With a calm expression, he looked at Nephi's and said, "The day after tomorrow. I still have things to finish in the Dark City. I will join you the day after tomorrow. For better or worse." She was silent for a few moments, and then a soft smile appeared on her face. "Thank you. I have some preparations to make too. We will return to the bright castle together then." He gave her a nod and turned away. Nephi's had never shown any sign of being able to feel fear, at least not that he remembered. But he knew that it was just a front. In fact, she knew fear all too well. Better than anyone here except maybe for him. She was introduced to it at a very young age after all. So he suspected that behind her indifferent face and even voice, she must have been scared too. She was just a young girl after all. And it was she who was going to fight the immortal Bright Lord to the death soon. Not them. Sunny looked at the shadows. One day, after one day, the prophecy will begin to come true. Chapter 275 Secrets of the Ruined Temple. As soon as the dawn came, bringing with it the mournful sound of retreating waves, Nephis and her cohort left the ruined cathedral. Sunny remained alone, standing on the edge between the darkness of the old temple and the light of the new day. Lingering in the ornate doorway, he remained motionless for a while and watched as the artificial sun rose into the bleak gray skies above the cursed city. After months spent in the company of other humans, being by himself once again felt strange. Just like it had felt strange to be with other people after all the time he had spent on his own here before that. Turning around, Sunny returned into the darkness. The grand hall of the ruined cathedral was peaceful and quiet. Without the menacing steel guardian, there was no one here to disturb the silence anymore. Even the darkness that populated the corners was empty and docile now, not at all the living entity it had been once. It felt sort of lonesome. Freely walking through the echoing expanse of the magnificent hall, Sunny looked around, taking in the sight of the cathedral that had sheltered in the past from a new perspective. Despite spending so much time here, he had never seen it like this. In the same way the inhabitants of the Dark City must have seen it all those years ago. Sunny had only looked down on the hall from the height of one of the ancient temple's support beams. It looked majestic, but it was also not safe anymore. With the Black Knight dead, no one was left to defend the cathedral from the nightmare creatures that would want to claim it as their nest. So Sunny couldn't stay here for long. Not that he had the luxury of that choice anymore. Throwing one last look at the beautiful dark hall, Sunny sighed and began climbing the statue of the nameless goddess. Back in the hidden chamber, it was once again utterly dark. Sunny hesitated for a bit and began collecting his belongings. It didn't take him long. Growing attached to material things was pointless on the forgotten shore. There was no way to take them with him to the real world after all, if he was even going to survive that long. But he still felt sad leaving all of his spoils behind. Back in the real world, Sunny never had a home like this, nor a lot of stuff to call his own. He had dreamed of enjoying a lavish lifestyle after becoming an awakened but got stuck in this hell instead. This spacious room he called his home was a form of consolation. But now he had to leave. In the end, he only took the bare necessities and then tidied the place up, wishing to leave it clean and orderly despite knowing that there was little chance of anyone stumbling on this place again. After everything was done, Sunny glanced at the tranquil room and hesitated for a bit. Then, he walked over to the wall where he had once scratched countless lines into the stone to count the days and summoned the prowling thorn. He wanted to leave a mark of his presence here. Something to tell that he had lived in this hidden chamber, in the ancient ruined cathedral, in the Dark City, on the forgotten shore. In this world. A small mark to witness that he had been here, had struggled here, and then left to fight for a chance to escape. Sunny wanted to come up with some profound words, but nothing came to mind. He wasn't really a profound person anyway. What he really wanted to carve into the wall was his true name. But even now, the paranoia stopped him. What if someone would come here one day and read it out loud? What a funny disaster that would be. Finally, he raised the kunai, a carved something beneath the lines that marked the days he had spent living in the ruined cathedral. Then Sunny turned around and walked away. There were 2 runes left on the wall behind him, one meaning sun, the other meaning is loss. There were 2 things Sunny wanted to accomplish before tomorrow morning. One was in the ruins of a library that he had never finished exploring, and the other one was right here in the ruined cathedral. Returning to the grand hall with his rucksack on his shoulder, Sunny walked past the statue of the nameless goddess and dove into one of the doors leading into the temple's inner sanctum. He had never been there before, kept away by the living darkness and the black night. But now that the devil was gone, Sunny was finally going to see what was hidden inside. Walking through the rooms and corridors that the priests and priestesses had once used, he looked around and didn't notice anything of interest. Everything was pretty much destroyed and ruined, with only a few mundane things remaining untouched. There was nothing here at all, at least that was what others would think. Sunny, however, suddenly stopped in front of a certain wall and tilted his head. There was nothing special about that wall, at least nothing that could be seen. But he could feel a heavy mass of shadows hiding behind it, as though there was a hollow space there. After searching for a while, he found a hidden lever and pressed it, or at least he tried. The ancient mechanism had rusted through and disintegrated over the thousands of years of neglect, of course. With a sigh, Sunny summoned the midnight shard, looked closer at the hollow wall, and inserted the tachi into the seam between its moving parts. Then, he unceremoniously used the unbreakable blade as a lever and pushed with all his inhuman strength. With a terrible scraping sound, a part of the wall slid away. The air rushed past Sunny, entering the dark mouth of a narrow corridor. Behind it, a set of stone stairs led down, deep down underground. With a resentful grimace, Sunny flourished the midnight shard to shake off the dust that clung to it, put it on his shoulder, and entered the secret passage. Chapter 276 Black Door. The hidden passage led Sunny underground, twisting and turning through the mass of stone. Despite the fact that he had been cautiously walking forward for a few minutes now, Sunny felt that he was still beneath the cathedral. In fact, by his estimation, he was approaching its center. And indeed, right beneath the spot where the statue of the goddess should have been, the narrow passage opened into a larger room. In it, a deep well leading even further down was situated, with a winding staircase spiraling down into the darkness. Sunny frowned. What is it with this place and creepy dark wells? Going further down was going to place him dangerously close to the catacombs. He knew all too well what kind of danger that would pose. The last time Sunny had ventured into the maze of ancient tunnels below the city, he barely escaped alive. After hesitating for a while, he stepped onto the staircase and began descending. Deep, ancient shadows surrounded Sunny, giving him a little comfort. At least he was among his kin. After a minute or so of walking down the stairwell, Sunny entered a large chamber that seemed to be carved into the bedrock, as opposed to being constructed by a human hand. On the other side of it, a large door forged from black steel stood, illuminated by 2 burning torches. 2 thoughts entered Sunny's mind simultaneously. The first one was that the metal from which the monolithic door was made looked eerily familiar. It was the same dark, lusterless, impenetrable alloy that the Black Knight had been made of. The second thought was even more disturbing. How come those torches are still burning? Had they been aflame for several thousand years? Come to think of it, the torches looked very strange. They seemed to be producing light, but it was pale and ghostly. There was no heat that came with it, too. The shadows cast by the ghostly flames were the most disturbing, though. Because of the movements of the fire, they were supposed to be dancing on the floor. But instead, the shadows were absolutely motionless. It was as though the light of the torches had trapped and paralyzed them somehow. Sunny thought for a while, and that ordered his own shadow to stay back. The shadow did not protest. In fact, it was visibly relieved. Taking a few exaggerated steps back, It merged with the deep darkness at the exit of the stairwell and waited there, glancing nervously at the strange motionless shadows from time to time. Sunny cautiously approached the black door and lowered the midnight shard into a protective stance. He was ready to face any sort of danger. But nothing attacked him. The only thing that happened was a sudden chill that ran through Sunny's body when he had entered the circle of light cast by the two ghostly torches. These torches They are definitely some sort of a protective charm. I am almost sure that their power can harm even shadows. The question he had to ask himself, though, was this: were the torches meant to keep something from entering the space that hid behind the black door? Or were they meant to keep something in? Panda novel, Siam. Well, there was only one way to find out. What Sunny was doing seemed absolutely crazy. But in fact it was not. He had not come into this underground chamber just because of idle curiosity or because of being blinded by greed and the prospect of finding a treasure. What led him here and pushed him to study the black door was his intuition. By now, Sunny had to admit that his intuition was more than a mere manifestation of his subconscious. It had turned out to be correct one too many times. Especially ever since he had consumed the drop of ichor. After that day, he was able to sense the presence of divinity. And sometimes he was even drawn to it, like he was drawn to this cathedral and to the mysterious key that lay buried in the body of the Lord of the Dead. The two seemed connected. And Sunny felt that he was about to find out how and why. But it was not all his intuition was capable of. There were other aspects to it too. In fact, Sunny suspected that it had more to do with his fated attribute than it had to do with the spark of divinity. If he were to guess, he would say that after he had been changed by the ichor, that attribute was slightly enhanced, giving him the ability to sense subtle tremors that ran through the strings of fate from time to time, the strings that were apparently tightly wrapped around his body. The combination of the change that happened to his eyes and his close relationship with those strings gave Sunny a slight affinity to revelations and fate, similar to the one Cassie had possessed, but infinitely less potent. It was enough to guide him to this door and make him want to open it, nevertheless. Stepping close to the monolithic black door, Sunny gazed at it and came to the conclusion that not even an entire army would have been able to break through this monstrous barrier. There was, however, a small keyhole hidden on its dark surface. Pulling on the string tied around his neck, Sunny took off the small metal key that hung on it and gripped it tightly in his hand. After hesitating for a few moments, he carefully inserted the key into the lock of the black door. It fit perfectly. As soon as Sunny put the key into the lock, the faint light of divinity it emanated suddenly became a little bit brighter. Sunny sighed, then readied himself and turned the key. Something clicked inside the metal door, and then it silently opened. The pale light of the ghostly torches swayed, as though moved by an otherworldly wind. Behind the door, a small room was carved into the rock. And in it, a corpse in a dark mantle was chained to the floor inside a circle. Sunny couldn't tell if the corpse belonged to a man or a woman because there was a strange mask covering its face. The mask was made out of black lacquered wood and carved to resemble the face of a ferocious demon. Its teeth were bared, with 4 fangs protruding from its mouth. The mask was crowned with 3 twisted horns. Inside the black chasms of its eyes, there was nothing but utter darkness. Chapter 277 Demon of Fate. Sunny held his breath, affected by the disturbing scene in front of him. The corpse was kneeling on the floor of the small cell, its hand chained to the floor. There was a circle carved into the stone around it, with countless symbols that Sunny could not understand surrounding it. However, the circle was broken. In the thousands of years since the fall of the Dark City, the floor of the dungeon cell had cracked, with several fractures running straight through the intricate engraving. Whatever it was the circle was meant to contain had either perished or escaped a long time ago. Now, the only thing that remained was a withered corpse. Coming closer, Sunny took another look at the person who had been imprisoned and died under the ruined cathedral, in a cell situated exactly beneath the statue of the nameless goddess. Because of the dark mantle and the black lacquered mask, Sunny couldn't glean a lot of information about the corpse. It seemed to belong to a human, but other than that, everything about it was a mystery. What terrible sin had this person committed to be condemned to this awful death? Strangely, Sunny's intuition was silent. It was as though there was nothing in front of him at all. To his sixth sense, the prisoner of the underground cell appeared as an empty space. Weird. This person had clearly been either hated or feared a lot to be locked behind all these barriers. Surely finding such a creature would affect my fate. Why don't I feel anything then? With a tense frown, he took a deep breath and carefully stepped inside the circle. It was then that Sunny noticed a chaotic mess of runes drawn on the floor near the prisoner's left hand. The sight of them almost sent him into a seizure. Staggering away, Sunny fell to his knees and threw up. Damn it! Those runes. Those were the same runes the spell used to describe the mysterious unknown. Only here, the intensity of the terrible effect they had on the mind of anyone who saw them was much, much stronger. What the hell? Wiping his mouth, Sunny grimaced and glanced at the masked corpse with a bit of resentment. Then he picked himself off the floor, took a deep breath, looked at the terrible runes once again. Immediately, Sunny felt a splitting headache and a sickening, terrible sensation spreading through his mind. It was as though all his thoughts and memories were being torn and twisted. But despite all of it, Sunny persevered and kept staring at the final message that the prisoner had left behind. He knew he couldn't read the runes. He didn't know that particular language, and the spell either was forbidden, incapable, or refused to translate them. But for some reason, Sunny felt compelled to try. Fighting through the intense pain, he slowly studied the strange runes. And then suddenly his eyes widened, because right below the chaotic mess of them, a line of text was written in the script he was familiar with, the usual runic language that the spell always used. This time it did not provide any translation. Luckily, Sunny had studied these runes and knew enough about them to understand what was written himself. The last thing the person imprisoned under the cathedral wrote before succumbing to death made him shudder. Scratched into the stone was a short prayer. Hail Weaver, demon of fate, firstborn of the unknown dash. Sunny stared at the runes until he was on the verge of losing consciousness. Only then did he turn away and closed his eyes. The nauseating dissonance of the terrible runes stayed carved into his mind. Only after several minutes passed did it fade a little, allowing him to breathe again. So, the mysterious weaver whose forbidden lineage he had inherited was, in fact, associated with fate. Just like Sunny himself. What were the chances? That's fated for you, I guess. The word he translated as demon wasn't the one used to describe nightmares creatures of the third rank, but a different one. Perhaps calling it a spirit or a demon would have been more suitable. A mortal but powerful and ominous deity. One different from gods but sharing the same nature. However, Sunny wasn't that versed in mystical terminology. All he knew was that the runic language was incredibly rich in words describing all types of monsters and creatures, while the human language wasn't. Hence, demon was fine with him. Apart from the tantalizing revelation about the mysterious weaver, he had noticed one other important thing by forcing himself to study the runes. Before, Sunny had thought that there was a single entity that the spell refused to call by its name and simply described as unknown dash, leading him to call it the unknown. Yes, Sunny was not that imaginative when it came to word choice. Whether the unknown was a kind of beings, a single existence, or a force of nature, he did not know. But now he realized that there were actually two types of forbidden runes, and two things that the spell did not know how or did not want to mention. One was the same as those used in the description of the drop of ichor, which stated that the vile thieving bird was hated both by the gods and by the unknown. It also said that the reflection of the unknown stayed forever frozen in the depths of Weaver's pupils, and that just looking at it drove the thieving bird mad. The other was the same as those used in the description of the stone saint, which was created by the last child of the unknown dash, and now here by the dead prisoner, who had called Weaver the firstborn of the unknown dash. What the hell does all of this supposed to mean? His suspicion that Weaver had something to do with the creation of the nightmare spell only grew stronger after learning that they had something to do with the domain of fate. After all, the spell seemed to be weaved out of numerous strings of fate, and there was this being called Weaver, who had the blood of gods in their veins, but was also somehow connected to the unknown. Feeling his headache only growing stronger, Sunny winced and shook his head. Later. I will think about it later. There would be time to ponder about all this later. Or not, if he dies trying to escape the forgotten shore. Either way, that time was not now. Turning back to the chained corpse, Sunny cautiously avoided looking at the dangerous runes and kneeled in front of it. He wanted to know what was hiding behind the mask. But as soon as he touched it, the corpse suddenly shattered and fell apart, turning into dust right in front of his eyes. Even its dark mantle rotted and disappeared, as though the thousands of years that had passed since the fall of the Dark City and the destruction of the cathedral finally caught up with it. Soon all that was left was a pile of dust. And the lacquered mask lying on top of it, its black surface glinting slightly in the pale light of the ghostly torches. Chapter 278 Weaver's Mask. Sunny looked at the black mask and the darkness hiding in its eyes. Its features were not as much contorted as fearsome by nature. It was simultaneously fearsome and somber, bestial and regal, as though existing at the border of all things. But most of all, the striking mask radiated a sense of mystery. The vicious fangs, the twisting horns, the black lacquered wood of it all, once again. His intuition was silent. There was nothing he felt toward the black mask, as though it didn't even exist. How strange! Sunny waited for a few moments, then picked up the mask and brought it to his face to take a closer look at it. But just a moment after his fingers touched the sleek surface of the polished wood, the mask suddenly disintegrated into a swarm of countless white sparks. Acting like water, the stream of light flowed toward Sunny's chest and entered into his body, disappearing into the dark depths of his shadow core. The voice of the spell thundered suddenly, louder than it had ever been before. You have received a memory. Sunny remained motionless for a few seconds, thinking about what just happened. By now, he knew that some memories could exist outside of the soul cores, just like how shard memories did. Was the black mask one of them? Somehow he felt that it wasn't. Why, I am even guessing. Let's just take a look. The reason he was lingering was because of the magnitude of the situation. Sunny didn't know anything about the mysterious mask, but he believed that this relic of the past was truly unusual. The circumstances that had led to its discovery were too extraordinary, and the place it was hidden in was too uncanny to think otherwise. So he was understandably apprehensive. With a bit of tension, Sunny dove into his soul sea and looked up at the spheres of light floating around the black sun of the shadow core. There was a new one there, which seemed to be much brighter than the rest. Summoning it down, he soon found himself looking into the eyes of the dark mask that hovered in front of him. It was as though he was facing an invisible person wearing it. Shifting uncomfortably, Sunny lowered his gaze a little and looked beneath the black lacquered wood. A moment later, he had to suppress the involuntary desire to cover his eyes with a hand. Inside the black mask, 7 radiant embers were burning with such intensity that it almost blinded him. All around them, incalculable ethereal strings were weaved into a pattern so vast and intricate that it almost seemed boundless. 7 anchors, gods. Stunned by the visage of the mask's spellweave, Sunny hesitated for a bit and summoned the runes that described it. What he saw made him take a step back and gasp. Memory. Weaver's Mask. Memory rank. Divine. Memory tier. 7. Memory type tool. Memory description. Weaver believed that knowledge was the origin of power and so always hid behind numerous lies, wearing them as a mantle. No one knew Weaver's thoughts, Weaver's face, and Weaver's heart. Even the gods could not see what hid behind the mask. Memory enchantments. Mantle of lies. Simple trick. Sunny had to look away for a moment to take a breath. Divine memory of the 7th tier. Holy hell! Words weren't enough to describe his astonishment. He was, however, surprised to see that the mask only had 3 enchantments. Sunny expected such a powerful memory to have dozens of them. Judging by how boundless and insanely complicated the weave of it was, there had to be that much, at least. Just what were these 3 enchantments to require a myriad of diamond strings to support them? Turning back to the runes, He concentrated on the enchantments and read further. Enchantment. Mantle of lies. Enchantment description. Hides the identity of its master. That description sounded very simple, but looking at the spell weave of the black mask, Sunny could tell that this enchantment was anything but. In fact, it was so vast and powerful that his mind was failing to even comprehend the scale of it. The enchantment was indeed designed to protect the identity of the person wearing the mask from prying eyes, but what it actually meant was that any form of detection was powerless against it. And Sunny suspected that any was not a figure of speech in this case, but simply a constatation of fact. For example, Cassie's aspect ability, which allowed her to see a person's attributes, would not work on someone wearing the mask. There were countless similar abilities among the awakened, none of which would work either. I guess that explains why my intuition was silent about the prisoner and the mask itself. Whatever kind of fate-related sixth sense I have is also countered by that thing. Even more terrifying was the fact that the enchantment was not aimed at just the awakened. The description of the weaver's mask stated that even the gods could not see through it, and it was honest truth. Nothing could penetrate the barriers of the mantle of lies, not even the sight of a god. Sunny gulp. Scary. But then, this incredible and frightening enchantment did not even take up a tenth of the volume of the ethereal diamond strings hiding beneath the surface of the black lacquered mask. The second enchantment was much the same. It was called, by which the spell was telling Sunny that it wasn't going to say anything about it. Its description was also empty. However, Sunny could tell that it had something to do with sight just by looking at the weave. He could also tell that it was not a passive enchantment, but an active one, meaning that currently he could not access it. Usually that would mean that he would be able to once he became a true awakened, but in this case, the amount of soul essence required to keep the enchantment activated for more than a fraction of a second was so vast that no awakened would have been able to. Only a saint would, perhaps. However, Sunny was not sure that he wanted to try even if he had the ability. The things Weaver saw were capable of driving unholy creatures insane, so it was wise to avoid going anywhere near that enchantment in the future. Most likely. Most of the spell weave of the Weaver's mask, however, was dedicated to the third enchantment, one that was called a simple trick. Judging by the mind-boggling complexity of the pattern that made it possible, that trick of Weaver's was anything but simple, though. It was the most bizarre, intricate, and ingenious thing that Sunny had ever seen. Curious, he glanced at the description, and froze, his eyes opened wide. The runes gleaming in the air read, Enchantment. Simple trick. Enchantment description. Reverses the effect of one's flaw. Chapter 279 Guilty Conscience. Sunny remained silent for a long time, staring at the black mask. The tranquil sea of his soul was still and silent, not at all like the storm that was currently raging in his heart. After a while he thought, that Weaver was one sly guy, girl, person being. Well, the fact that I don't even know that much only serves to prove the point. And I thought I was good at deceit and manipulation. How devious one must be to not let even the gods, even the nightmare spell, know anything about them. But it was fitting in a strange kind of way. If Weaver's domain was that of fate, there was no other way. Fate was a terrifying but subtle tool. Manipulating it to your advantage required a very special kind of genius, one that was directly opposite to any kind of directness, straightforwardness, and brutal power. However, if given the choice, Sunny would have preferred to face War God in battle than to make someone like Weaver his enemy. Masterful liars were far more dangerous than deadly warriors. He knew it better than most. Exiting the soul sea, Sunny hesitated for a little and then summoned the Weaver's mask. The cool wooden surface of the mask appeared on his face, held in place by some invisible force. Immediately, his vision changed slightly. Everything became sharper, clearer, more vivid. Sunny could feel the mask reaching into his eyes and connecting to something, the strange legacy he had inherited by consuming the drop of Weaver's blood. He sensed his intuition becoming more potent, too. It was as though he could almost see the mysterious strings of fate that span across the entire world. Almost. Glancing at the pile of dust that remained of the prisoner, Sunny frowned slightly. The identity of the person who had been wearing the weaver's mask remained a secret. Just who had this corpse belonged to, and how had they ended up chained to the floor in a hidden dungeon cell beneath the majestic cathedral? The easiest thing to assume was that it was Weaver themselves, but Sunny dismissed that theory immediately. From everything he knew about the original Master the Mask, the power of that creature was just below that of the gods. And that of the unknown, perhaps. If Weaver appeared on the forgotten shore, the whole dark city would have been wiped out of existence before any harm was done to them. So who could have been wearing Weaver's mask? Some powerful carrier of the nightmare spell that had received it as a memory. Just how Sunny did. Well, if Weaver was really a demon, which was a strange kind of a lesser deity, was there a cult dedicated to them? Had there been priests and followers of Weaver? The message the prisoner had left behind sounded awfully close to a prayer. Had that person been deemed a heretic and condemned to this place for that reason? Sunny sighed. There was no way to know. Hesitating for a bit, he turned away and left the somber dungeon cell behind. He only had this one day to finish all the things he had left undone in the dark city. There was no time for fruitless pondering. Once outside, Sunny walked over to the place where he had left his shadow and took a look at himself through its eyes. What he saw made him blink a couple of times. Huh! The black lacquered mask sat snugly on his face, hiding his features. He couldn't even see his eyes, which were drowned in darkness. What's more, even his height was somehow unclear. Sunny didn't actually become taller, but from the side it looked as though he did. Sort of. 1 second it did, and the next one it did not. It was sort of similar to how people's faces changed when lighted from different directions. In any case, he couldn't tell for sure how tall the person facing the shadow was. How fun! It was not that Sunny became completely unrecognizable, though. He would still have to be careful to hide the context clues about himself while wearing the mask. Mundane things like the way he walked, his usual mannerisms, and other subtle but unique details of his behavior could still betray his identity despite the fact that it was masked from all unnatural means of detection. To truly make himself appear as something else, Sunny would have to put on a performance. Good thing he was practicing the shadow dance then. Was it not designed to fully imitate someone else's battle style and physicality? What a wonderful coincidence. Finally, the moment he had been dreading came. It was time to test if the simple trick was really capable of turning his flaw upside down. Needless to say, Sunny was nervous. His lips became dry, and he unconsciously tried to lick them. But now there was a mask on his face, so he couldn't. That bad habit of his had to be put to rest, apparently. Great. All right, let's do this. Opening his mouth, Sunny said out loud, "I am very tall." In the process, he grimaced, expecting the familiar pain to invade his mind. But there was nothing. Sunny froze, blinked a couple of times and waited. Still nothing happened. Beneath the mask, a wide grin appeared on his face. "I am not only tall, but also exquisitely handsome. But that is not all, I am incredibly honest and nice too. Every girl I meet immediately falls in love with me. Boys too. That's just how lovable, handsome, nice and tall I am. Everything I have just said is absolutely true." His mind was peaceful and quiet. There was no pain, no pressure. In fact, Sunny felt great. Wow! Feeling an almost overwhelming desire to continue spouting lies, he laughed in exhilaration. Amazing! This can be. But then, a tremendous explosion of pain suddenly threw him to the ground. With a startled yelp, Sunny grasped his head and then groaned through gritted teeth, feeling as though it was about to burst. What the hell? He just wanted to say how useful the ability to lie could be. Wait, the ability to lie would, indeed, be very useful, which meant that by stating that fact, he would be telling the truth. And the Weaver's mask did not remove his flaw, just reversed it. So, it seemed like while wearing it, Sunny could not tell even a word of truth. That seemed like the right conclusion to make. But he needed to test it to be absolutely sure. With a doomed sigh, Sunny waited for a moment and then said, "My name is." A moment later, Another pained scream resounded in the darkness of the underground chamber. Chapter 281 Last Job. Sometime later, Sunny emerged from the ruins of the cathedral with a rucksack on his shoulder, took one last look back and left. Whatever his future was going to be, he doubted that he would come back here anytime soon. It was a bittersweet goodbye. Cautiously walking through the familiar streets of the dark city, where he knew every turn and every piece of rubble, in this district of it at least, Sunny kept his guard up. Many things must have changed in the months he had been away traveling through the labyrinth. The nightmare creatures he knew and, more importantly, knew how to avoid might have wandered away or perished, and new horrors might have taken their place. He had to stay prudent and careful, but still his next and final goal was not that far away. As he sneaked toward it, Sunny thought about the Weaver's mask and the ways it could change his life. At first, he thought about simply never taking it off and walking around while delivering a deluge of lies. This way he would be safe from revealing his most guarded secret and becoming someone's slave at least. But after considering this seriously, he came to the conclusion that it was not the best decision in his current circumstances. First of all, one couldn't be a part of any collective while lying all the time. Sunny had an unpleasant experience of being expelled from various groups for various reasons, and not being sincere and honest was one of the surest ways to make people want to avoid you at all costs. Eventually, at least. And no one was able to survive alone in the dream realm. Not in a way that a person would want to live anyway. Sunny knew a lot about this side of things too. But most importantly, he was not going to be able to keep this lying for long anyway. Not when dealing with people who already knew him. Kai and Cassie would notice the strange effect of the mask immediately. Kai because of his ability to sense lies, Cassie because her ability to see attributes would suddenly stop working. But others would catch on that something strange was going on with him pretty quickly too, simply because of how drastic the change in his behavior would be. Especially Nephites, who knew him so well. After that, they would inevitably have a lot of questions, and answering those questions, even with lies, would put him in more danger than he already was in. So, sadly, Weaver's mask was not a panacea to Sunny's current situation. At best, it would be able to help him avoid certain predicaments if used sparingly. But really, he didn't want anyone to know that he was in possession of that memory at all. Sunny had to think of the future. If he was lucky enough to survive the fall of the Bright Castle and return to the real world, that was where the Black Mask could create miracles for him. It would allow him to have a hidden persona that was in no way connected to an awakened named Sunless, and as such, allow him to do and achieve things that would have been impossible or too dangerous to try as himself. To that effect, no one could know that the strange black wooden mask was connected to him, not even people whom he, somewhat, trusted, both for his own good and theirs. It is such a pity, though. It was. Just imagining Castor's face if he were to ever learn about what type of treasure Sunny had somehow found this time was tempting enough to change his plans. Sunny's face darkened. He had not forgotten about the promise Nephites had made him at the start of their journey to the Hollow Mountains. Tomorrow he was finally going to learn what was the deal with the proud legacy, and what exactly the relationship between Changing Star and him was. And how big were the chances of Sunny having to face Castor in battle. Despite all his dislike for the handsome scion of the Honley clan, Sunny was reluctant to actually fight him. No matter how much progress he had made to get ready for the bloody conclusion of this disastrous chapter of his life, Castor was still not someone to be taken lightly. He was a tremendously deadly opponent just based on what Sunny knew about him. And there were secrets that the legacy had been keeping as well. That charm of his. What does it do? He was certain that he would defeat Castor if push came to shove. But the cost he would have to pay for that victory would be heavy. Perhaps much more heavy than he was willing to pay. Suddenly uneasy, Sunny silently shook his head and continued on his way. As the sun began to roll toward the western horizon, he approached his goal, the ruins of an ancient library that stood lonesomely among the decimated buildings. Back near the end of his lonely months of hunting monsters on the streets of the Dark City, Sunny had begun exploring this ruin for bits of information about the history of the Forgotten Shore. Because of his chance encounter with the Stone Saint, and then with Kai, which led to him abandoning the ruins for a long expedition into the labyrinth, he had never finished this project. There was this one vast mosaic in particular that Sunny was interested in. It sprawled across the entire floor of the library's main hall and was mostly covered by rubble. In the past, Sunny was not strong enough to move the rubble out of the way. He had been hoping to make the stone saint do it for him, but sadly, the shadow was currently slumbering in the depths of his shadow core, evolving into whatever it was she was going to turn into. Just to be sure, he checked one more time to see if the mysterious process was still going and sighed in disappointment. Luckily, he had grown much stronger himself during these months. Sunny was pretty sure that now, he would be able to clear the mosaic with his own 2 hands. It was just going to be a lot of work. Sending his shadow into the library to make sure that no abomination had made its nest there during his absence, Sunny entered its cool shadow of the ruin and sighed. Better get started. Soon, the scraping sound of heavy boulders being moved could be heard under the partially collapsed roof of the ancient building. Chapter 281 7 Heroes. In the depths of the night, Sunny was finally done with the arduous task of clearing the floor of the ruined library. Tiredly standing in the center of the circular hall, he found himself in the middle of a vast mural. The mosaic had endured the passage of time in an almost pristine condition. Most of it was preserved perfectly, with only a few small sections destroyed by corrosion or the ill will of the creature that inhabited the Crimson Spire. By now, Sunny was certain that it was the terror of the forgotten shore that had obliterated any depictions of the 7 heroes' faces. He didn't know how it was possible but felt that the same furious force that had decapitated the ancient statues was responsible for the damage done to the engravings in the ancient mine and to this mural. It was as though the terror wanted to erase any sign of the founders of the Starlight Legion from history. Their names were forgotten, every person who had known of their stories turned into dust, and even the stones that bore their image were desecrated and shattered. How great the resentment that the evil creature harbored toward them must have been, for it to go to such lengths in its mad desire to obliterate their legacy. With a sigh, Sunny turned slightly and walked to the edge of the mural. He was searching for the start of its story. Depicted on the mural was not one image, but a long series of them, spiraling from the edges of the mosaic to its center like a long scroll. On them, the history of the land consumed by darkness was shown, ending with the coming of a new dawn. Sunny already knew what events had brought the curse of all-consuming darkness to the forgotten shore, and how the ancient inhabitants of this land fought against all odds to resist it. Now he was going to learn the final mystery, the reason for their eventual downfall. Finding the first image, he studied it and lingered for a bit. Then he walked on, watching the history unfurl itself beneath his feet. As the curse subdued the world under the veil of everlasting darkness and terrible creatures started to attack the human settlements, one after another, mighty champions began to appear to battle them. But no matter how strong, brave, and valiant those champions were, none of them was able to resist for long, especially not when their own allies started turning into monsters. It was impossible to face the terrifying foes hiding in the darkness when no one was there to cover your back. Or even worse if those you trusted the most to do so were the ones delivering a deadly blow instead. But still, humanity persisted. Months passed, then years. And eventually, a new generation grew up in this horrible world. Born in the all-consuming darkness, 7 valiant heroes gave an oath to return the light to the cursed land, Sunny whispered. The people who would later create the Starlight Legion were indeed born in the darkness. They never even saw the light that they would swear to bring back. All they knew of it were the tales their elders had told them, tales of a time when people never turned into nightmares, and the beautiful stars shone even in the darkest of nights. This new generation grew up surrounded by nothing but darkness and horror, and was forged by it into a far more fearsome force than their parents had ever been. Hard times created hard people, and their time was as unforgiving and harrowing as one could imagine. Beyond so, even. And so, the people it created adapted to match this dark reality. Eventually, 7 of them rose above the rest, each leading their faction in the constant battle against the encroaching doom. Sunny stopped and studied the image that showed all 7 of them. Even if their faces were damaged beyond recognition. There was a knight in an intricate plate armor forged of white metal, with a stalwart blade grasped firmly in his hands. a graceful priestess in a light flowing robe, her delicate hands shining with gentle light. A mighty hunter in an archaic cuirass leaning on a beautiful bronze spear. A masterful builder holding a mason's hammer in his calloused hands. A regal lord with a humble crown resting on his head, a single gem decorating its simple design. A subtle and merciless slayer with a ghostly stiletto hidden cunningly behind her back. And a stranger from a misty land who wore a stone-like armor and never showed his face, with a heavy round shield resting at his feet. Sunny looked at the 7 heroes, thinking, knight, hunter, lord, stranger, slayer, builder and priestess. Midnight shard, zenith shard, dawn shard, dusk shard, moonlight shard. And the other 2. Sunlight shard and starlight shard. The fate of the last 2 shard memories remained unknown to him. Nephice must have known something though. Otherwise, she would not have ventured into the dangerous expedition to the Hollow Mountains to seek out the Crown of Dawn. Although the history of the Forgotten Shore was presented in more detail here, it did not give him any revelations yet. Thoughtful, Sunny turned away from the image of the 7 heroes and continued on. At some point in history, the heroes came together, created the Starlight Legion, and united the surviving remnants of humanity under its banner. It was also then that they gave their defiant oath. They must have been mad. Weren't striving to achieve something impossible the definition of madness? Sunny frowned, knowing full well that, in this case, the 7 heroes actually managed to fulfill their crazy ambition. It was all a little too close to home. He also knew someone who liked to set impossible goals and had an infuriating track record of proving them possible. But how did it all end? Yes, the heroes achieved their dreams. But the Forgotten Shore still turned into a desolate hell. What happened to their light? Looking at the next images of the mosaic, Sunny got a feeling that he was about to find out. Chapter 282 Sacrifice. As Sunny walked in circles, drawing near to the center of the mosaic, he saw the depiction of various deeds that the Starlight Legion had achieved. The warriors led by the 7 heroes were truly a fearsome force. Forged and tempered by the relentless malice of their dark world and the unassailable will of their leaders, they drowned the Forgotten Shore in the blood of the cursed creatures. Even though many of them had turned into monsters themselves, especially those who had allowed themselves to falter in their conviction, the rest continued on, unbroken. Sunny couldn't tell how powerful exactly the members of the Legion were, but from some clues of their battles, he guessed that they were at approximately the same level as the awakened of his own world, at least at the beginning. With time, however, it seemed as though the warriors of the cursed land had grown much stronger. If most of the creatures they were fighting were of the corrupted rank, then that would put the Legion far above the humans back in the real world. Sunny wasn't sure if the 7 heroes and their soldiers were carriers of the nightmare spell, though, and if the same hierarchy of power could be applied to them. Eventually, the surviving humans migrated to the shore of the colossal impact crater and built an impregnable wall around their new city. This endeavor alone was so arduous and ambitious that he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Sunny slowed his steps. On the images in front of him, the construction of the Crimson Spire. No, it wasn't crimson yet back then, had begun. The Cyclopean Tower was built west of the city, reaching high into the sky like an axis of the world. Like a stairwell that was designed to allow humans to touch the heavens. This was what he was truly interested in. Sunny wanted to know what happened in the spire, how the artificial sun was created, and how the darkness that consumed this land was turned into a transient black sea. What he saw next made him falter, and then close his eyes with an expression of deep, exhausted resentment. In the second-to-last image, the 7 heroes were depicted standing apart in the 7 spots of the Forgotten Shore. In front of each of them, a crowd of thousands of people kneeled, waiting. Among those people were the warriors of the Legion and the civilians from the city, men and women, old and young. Each of the heroes held a weapon in their hands. Course, this is what happened. What else would it be? A feeling of dark, bitter disappointment grasped his heart. Sunny didn't even know why he felt this way. It was not like he knew anything about the 7 heroes, really. But at some point, maybe because he needed to believe that there was a tiny glimmer of light in the vast and endless night, He had begun thinking of them as a symbol of the best humanity could be. What a foolish thought. He of all people should have known better. Curse you all. In the last image, one that took the center of the mosaic, 7 tall hills made of dead bodies surrounded the spire. Tens of thousands of people had been slaughtered, their blood flowing like rivers toward the dark tower. On top of each hill stood one of the valiant heroes, their hands stained red to the shoulder. As the last sacrifice, the slaughterers turned their weapons on themselves, thrusting them into their hearts. And somewhere out there, he knew, a tiny black seed floated in a pool of blood. Sunny grimaced in disgust. This was your dream. This is how you decided to bring back the light. You sick wretches. As the rivers of blood flowed to the spire, 7 streams of glowing crimson light moved above them and entered it from 7 directions. These streams represented the soul essence of numerous humans who had been sacrificed to create the artificial sun. But theirs wasn't the most terrible fate. In the center of the spire, a lone human figure was drawn, convulsing in harrowing agony as the raging storm of soul energy entered her body. The conflux of all that power, the sacrificial vessel meant to be its conduit, the anchor of the sun. Sunny recognized that figure too. To him, the features of her face were painfully familiar. It was the same face as that of the nameless goddess whose statue stood in the ruined cathedral. The crimson light entered her body and shot from her screaming mouth and eyes upward, pure and white. It rose to the height of the spire, where a new sun was being born. Frightened by its light, the darkness retreated underground, where it was locked behind 7 seals that were left behind by the heroes as their last deed. The rest was easy to deduce. After the heroes perished to create the artificial sun, everything was fine for a while. But then, maybe after a few decades or even hundreds of years, the light of the sun began to dim. So the people of the Dark City had to make a new sacrifice. Perhaps the second time, only 7 people had been killed to renew the power of the spire. But then it happened again, and that time 7 was not enough. So they sacrificed 14. And when it happened again, they sacrificed a few dozen. And eventually, hundreds of people were being slaughtered every year to keep the sun burning. Because of the simple fact that the 7 heroes and their people, all of them had terribly mighty souls. But their descendants, who didn't have to grow up in utter darkness and fight terrible monsters to live through the day, did not. At some point in this vicious cycle, the vessel that had been imprisoned in the spire and served as the anchor for the bloodthirsty sun was corrupted. Whatever kind of conscience it had left had been completely shattered. The nameless goddess of the Dark City became the crimson terror of the forgotten shore. All that pain, all that rage, all that blood exploded from the spire and infected the very land itself, growing into an endless labyrinth of the strange crimson coral. The 7 seals came undone, releasing that darkness that had been imprisoned underground for hundreds of years. This was what Cassie had seen in the vision. The darkness and the fury of the newborn terror fell on the humans of the Dark City like a tide and wiped them all out, erasing even the memory of them from the face of the world. This was how the Forgotten Shore was born. Chapter 283, final piece of the puzzle. So this is how it is. Sunny stared at the last image of the mosaic, a dark and resentful expression frozen on his face. Depicted in the center of the mural, a sun fueled by blood shone on the mountains formed by dead bodies. Tens of thousands of people had been slaughtered to create it, and thousands more must have been butchered later on to keep it burning in the indifferent sky. The first sacrifices had died willingly, lured into submission by their fanatical rulers. What about those who came after? Somehow Sunny doubted it. And for what? How did it all end? The 7 seals had been broken, and the ancient civilization had been obliterated. But the sun created and nurtured by it was not destroyed, just corrupted. It still rose in the morning and fell beyond the horizon after dusk, illuminating the desolate hell of its own creation. As long as its vessel, the terror of the Crimson Spire, existed at the center of the labyrinth, it would continue to shine in the cold gray skies. And as long as it did, the darkness that had escaped its underground prison and turned into the cursed sea was going to continue coming and going, scared of its light. Great. The two deserve each other. He didn't know why the all-consuming darkness had become a literal sea of impenetrably black water, but had a guess or two. Either hundreds of years spent locked away behind the seals had affected it that way, or the artificial sun had. The terror had been changed by the curse, so why couldn't the curse be changed by the terror in return? Why wasn't that sun extinguished, though? There was no one alive on the forgotten shore to make sacrifices to the spire anymore, but Sunny suspected that there was a reason why the crimson coral seemed to grow either out of or toward bones. If he was right, the whole labyrinth was a giant maw with which the terror absorbed the soul essence of every creature that bled on the coral before it died. It was all a part of its body. Sunny shivered, realizing that both the labyrinth and the dark sea were, in fact, colossal living creatures. It was just that the scale of them was so boundless that they seemed like forces of nature. Compared to the eternal struggle of the two titanic beings, the struggle of a handful of tiny humans was nothing short of insignificant. Or was it? Suddenly he frowned. What about Nephice and her plan? How did the shard memories come into all of this? At first, a dark thought entered his mind. He imagined that Changing Star was preparing a mass sacrifice of her own, a hecatomb to appease the Crimson Terror. The number of the sleepers being sent to the Forgotten Shore each year was too eerily similar to the number of sacrifices made to the Crimson Spire by the inhabitants of the Dark City to be a simple coincidence. But he quickly dismissed that thought. After all, the sacrifices were meant to renew the power of the Blood Sun, and that was not Neff's goal. If anything, she meant to destroy it once and for all to gain entry to the gateway hidden in the spire. So, what did it all mean? Sunny scowled, remembering every piece of information about the 7 heroes and their cursed land he knew. And most importantly, those that came directly from the spell. After a while he muttered, "Time has erased their names and their faces, but the memory of the defiant oath still remains." This was the second part of the description that the spell had given the Starlight Legion armor. His eyes widened. All this time, he thought that this sentence simply meant that the legacy of the 7 heroes lived on even after their deaths. But now, he suddenly realized that the truth might have been far more straightforward. The key to understanding the secret of the shard memories was right in front of him this whole time. In fact, it came from the first memory he had ever gotten on the Forgotten Shore. The azure blade. "On this forgotten shore, only steel remembers," he whispered, a sudden understanding dawning on him like a revelation. The memory of the defiant oath remained. And only steel remembered. Sunny rubbed his face. I am such a fool. Everything he needed to learn the truth had been at his disposal from the very start of it all. The heroes were long gone, but their terrible oath was still here, preserved in cold steel. It was not the memory of it that remained, but the memory. The shards were that memory. Of course. It all makes so much sense now. But then, what was their purpose and why was Nephi so motivated to find each one? That was easy to guess too. Cassie had basically told him all those months ago. In the end, I saw a colossal, terrifying crimson spire. At its base, 7 severed heads were guarding 7 locks. In its fury, the terror of the Crimson Spire had beheaded the statues of its creators and brought their heads as trophies to guard the entrance to its lair, where Cassie had seen them, as well as 7 mysterious locks. What did a lock need? All locks required a key to either open them or shut them closed. Sunny slowly exhaled. The 7 seals that kept the all-consuming darkness locked underground came undone, but they weren't destroyed. If one had all the keys, it was still possible to seal the cursed sea once again. That was what the 7 heroes had left behind. And with the cursed darkness locked away, the spire would lose its most deadly line of defense. Finally, everything became clear. Sunny remained motionless for a long time, looking at the bloody images beneath his feet. After a while, he sighed and turned away. There was a bitter taste in his mouth. Sick. I'm sick of this place. So sick of all of this. Cassie's vision showed her fire and rivers of blood. But it could all burn to the ground. He didn't care anymore. Chapter 284. Nothing serious. In the cold light of dawn, Sunny approached the spot where the other members of the cohort and he agreed to meet. The shadow had already located their camp in the ruin of an ancient building and was currently watching them, hidden in the darkness. The 5 youths were busy preparing for the last stretch of the way to the bright castle. They were calm and collected, not at all like people who were about to face the horrifying wrath of the Bright Lord. What kind of horror had they not faced already? Climbing over the rubble, Sunny let Nephice and the rest know of his approach and jumped down. Landing just a few meters away from the group, he straightened his back and gave them an indifferent look. "Hey!" They greeted him in a reserved manner. A palpable tension permeated the air, making everyone reluctant to speak too much. Only Effie was seemingly unaffected by this dark mood. Leaning on a stone wall, the huntress was enthusiastically gnawing on a juicy bone. Her white teeth were effortlessly crushing it into tiny pieces, which were then chewed and swallowed along with the marrow. Noticing Sunny, she smiled. "Hey, doofus." He gave her a nod and wanted to turn away, but then noticed a slight frown that appeared on Effie's face. Looking at him with a bit of uncertainty, she asked, You all right?" Sunny was silent for a few moments, then smiled. Finally, he said in an even tone, "I'm perfect." Leaving the doubtful huntress behind, he walked past Castor and approached Nephice. The changing star was standing with her back to the group, looking up at the silhouette of the bright castle that loomed in the distance. Hearing his steps, she turned around. The gentle light of dawn reflected in her eyes, making them appear to shine. "You've made it, Sunny. I am glad." He shrugged. "Why? You didn't expect me to show up." She was silent for a while and then looked away. A lock of silver hair fell on her eyes. Nephice tucked it behind her ear and sighed. "Could I not? It's not like I know the future." After that she smiled. Amusing. In the 11 months they had spent on the forgotten shore, this was only the second time Sunny heard Changing Star tell a joke, and the first time it was actually funny, for little macabre. But what was the harm in indulging in a bit of dark humor at this point? Sunny did not return the smile, however. Glancing in the direction of the bright castle, he asked, "So, what's the plan?" Nephice shrugged. "This time there is no plan. We have confirmed that Gunlog is still pretending to be looking for Effie to bring her to justice for killing the missing guards. Once we enter the outer settlement, the members of the host will come for her. Then I will most likely be forced to challenge him. We'll see after that." Sunny looked at her with a dark expression. "Pretty much exactly what I expected." He didn't hesitate to ask, "Can you really break his armor? Even with the Dawn Shard, your sword is barely equal to an ascended memory. And that thing is a true transcended echo." She lingered for a while before answering. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and even. "I don't have to break the armor. I just have to break the man." Sunny shook his head with a humorless smile. "Good luck achieving one without the other." He paused for a moment, and then said without a hint of levity in his voice, "Anyway, you owe me a conversation." Changing Star glanced at him, then nodded. "All right, but not here." With that, she gave the others a sign to wait and walked away. Sunny followed. His shadow stayed, making sure that no one was going to try and eavesdrop on them. It was staring directly at Castor, following his every move with intense attention. As they walking, Sunny suddenly said, "By the way, I have something to tell to you two." Nephice glanced at him and slightly raised an eyebrow. "Yes. What is it?" Sunny was silent for a bit. Then he smiled. "Oh, it's nothing serious. Do you remember a guy called Harper?" She frowned, then shook her head. "Should I? Who is he?" Sunny shrugged. His expression remained neutral. "Just a guy that I killed. He was one of Gunlog's spies." Neff looked at him for a few moments, then asked with indifferent confusion, "What about him?" A slight shadow ran over Sunny's face. However, his smile remained exactly the same. "No, nothing. Just wondered if you knew him." When they walked far enough and were concealed from the eyes of the cohort by several tall walls, Changing Star stopped and turned to face him. Looking at Sunny, she said, It is good that we can speak privately. Actually, I wanted to ask you a favor. He blinked. Well, that is unexpected. What is it? She hesitated for a few moments. After my fight with Gunnalug is over, when I win, I might not be in the best shape. Even if I am, there will be a flood of soul essence pouring into my body. It will incapacitate me for a bit. The changes that happened to the body after a small portion of soul essence was consumed were subtle, but in large quantities, it could be disorienting, sometimes even debilitating for a short while. Sometimes experiencing these changes and getting used to them took a little time. Sunny tilted his head. A flood of soul essence. What does it matter if her core is either full to the brim or at least almost saturated? He frowned, trying to guess what he wanted from him. So what do you need me to do? Keep Haruz busy while you recover. She shook her head, then looked away. A light sigh escaped from Changing Star's lips. No. I want you to make sure that Castor is nowhere near me when that happens. Here it was. The truth was about to come out. Sunny stared at Nephi's, his expression cold and dark. After a few moments of tense silence, he asked, "Why? What's the deal with you and Castor?" She looked at him, her striking gray eyes calm and deep. Then she said, "It's very simple, really. Castor has been sent here to kill me." Chapter 285 Kill Order. Sunny remained silent for a few moments. Finally, it became clear that Nephis wasn't going to continue. Feeling a slight sense of exasperation, he asked, "Why would Castor want to kill you?" Despite the calm appearance, there was a tempest raging in his mind. The revelation of Castor's true intention had shaken Sunny. Yes, he disliked the proud legacy. And yes, their dynamic with Changing Star had always been a bit strange, but he never expected to hear something like this. In his mind, Castor was more of an opportunist with distasteful ambitions, most likely having to do with the purity of his clan's bloodline, than a cold-blooded killer. In what world did him wishing to kill Nephis made any sense? He was her #1 fan. The only logical explanation Sunny could find was that the proud scion had been secretly working for Gunnalug all along. But then, that theory also didn't hold when subjected to a close inspection. The Bright Lord was determined to kill Changing Star with his own 2 hands and in front of hundreds of people. What would he need Castor for? Nephis lingered for a bit, then shrugged. "People have been trying to kill me for as long as I can remember. Have you forgotten?" Sunny slowly shook his head. No, I did not. But what does that have to do with Castor?" She smiled. "They were not going to stop just because I came of age, survived my first nightmare, and was sent into the dream realm. If anything, that would have been the perfect opportunity to finally make me disappear forever. Sleepers enter this cursed world alone, away from the protections of society and whatever allies they might have in the real one. Do you see?" He gave her a nod, his expression growing dark. Indeed, no one was as vulnerable as young sleepers entering the dream realm for the first time. Nephi sighed and looked away. "In any case, when I enrolled into the academy, I knew that someone among our classmates had to have received orders to make sure that I never returned from the dream realm. I just didn't know who it was." Suddenly, she glanced at him. The corner of her lips curled upward. "Actually, for a long time, I thought that it was you." Sunny blinked and stared at her in disbelief. "What? Me? Are you actually never mind. What exactly about me made you think that I'm an agent of some secret legacy cabal? Do I look like a legacy to you?" Nephis calmly looked him in the eye. "Honestly, not any legacy that I know. But there were too many things about you that didn't make sense." He frowned. "Do tell." She slowly raised her hand, then began counting on her fingers. "Let's see. You claim to be an orphan from the outskirts, but somehow managed to survive both the first nightmare and the arrival on the Forgotten Shore. You didn't consume any soul shards, but kept growing more powerful. You said that you had never held a sword in your hand, but absorbed my lessons with astonishing speed. And finally, every other word you said was a lie, especially when it came to your origins, your past, your strength, and your aspect." Running out of fingers on one hand, she made a fist and pointed to it. "Need I continue?" Sunny cleared his throat. No, well, when you put it like this. She smiled and shook her hand, then lowered it. But after some time I realized that my suspicions about you were wrong. If you were really tasked with killing me, you could have just left me on the ashen barrow. Back then I was as good as dead. But you didn't. In fact, you risked a lot to take both Cassie and me with you. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. So when we reached the bright castle and Castor immediately appeared, insinuating his way into my inner circle, I knew pretty much instantly that it was him. Sunny frowned. Aren't you getting ahead of yourself? Don't get me wrong, I'm the last person in this world who would want to defend that pompous bastard, but there were hundreds of sleepers in our crop, and out of those, only 7 were sent to the Forgotten Shore. And only 4 lived long enough to see the castle. What are the chances that the person with orders to make you vanish was among them? Isn't it a bit too big of a coincidence? Changing Star slowly shook her head. Who said it was a coincidence? People often tend to forget that the spell has a mind of its own. It sees all and hears all, and it really loves to play with fate. If there was someone among those hundreds of people tasked with killing me, the chances of me having a fateful encounter with them in the dream realm would be all but guaranteed. That is how the spell always does things. Sunny had to agree. The spell indeed loved to play with fate. His whole damn life was proof of that. Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. Of course, despite my suspicions, I wasn't sure at first. But the more I observed Castor, the more convinced I became that I was right. He did everything in his power to get close to me, and then tried his hardest to subtly isolate me from everyone I could have trusted. He spent his time studying my every move, while keeping his secrets close to his chest. It's him. I've been sure of it for a long time. Sunny tilted his head, trying to digest this new information. After a while he asked, if Castor wanted to kill you, why hasn't he made a move to kill you yet? She lingered for a bit, then smiled slightly. Because among all of the humans on the Forgotten Shore, he knows what the scions of the Immortal Flame Clan are capable of the best. Isn't it ironic? He respects my ability too much to be careless. Maybe even fears it. And he can't allow himself to fail. His honor won't allow it. So, Castor won't attack until he is absolutely sure that I won't be able to resist. He'll make his move when I have no chance to escape. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Let me rephrase that. If Castor wants to kill you, why is he still alive? Why didn't you kill him already? He was sure that if Nephis wanted to, the proud legacy would have been dead a long time ago. Changing Star hesitated, and then said in an even tone, because I need him for what is to come. It doesn't matter that he intends to betray me. Traitor or not, he is of use. Chapter 286 Blessings of the Fire. Sometime later, the 6 of them left the secluded ruin and made their way toward the bright castle. The dark city was silent and bleak, its streets devoid of life and movement. Even the nightmare creature seemed to remain hidden in the lairs today, as though the feeling of the tension that hung in the air was like a harbinger of a disastrous change. A lonely star was about to ignite in the sky above the cursed city. Nephis was the first one to walk under the marble arch and step on the road that led to the outer settlement. Her face was calm and motionless, any hint of emotion hidden behind her usual mask of indifference. It was as though she was returning home in triumph, not marching to her own execution. There was a slightly distant look in her eyes. Sunny abandoned his usual position at the back of the group and was now walking side by side with her. Maybe it was just a whim, but he felt unwilling to follow in her footsteps as he had always done before, from the first day they met. As they ascended the tall hill, Changing Star suddenly asked, Sunny, do you remember your first nightmare well? Her voice sounded relaxed and idle. He cast a sideways glance at her and hesitated for a few moments. Then he answered in an even tone. Like it was yesterday. She smiled slightly. Was it hard? Slowly, a grin appeared on his face. Hard? No, not hard. Impossible. It was a ghastly, despicable, and torturous ordeal. Truly the stuff of nightmares. Calling it hard would be an injustice. With a dismissive shrug, Sunny drove the memories of the Black Mountain away and asked, "What about yours?" Nephice looked away, remembering. After a while she said, "Mine wasn't that bad, actually." He stared at her in disbelief. "What, you only had to kill a measly 1,000 unholy titans with your bare hands or something like that? Knowing you, not that bad means that it was nothing short of a true horror show." She slowly shook her head. "No, mean it. I didn't have to fight anyone really. Up until the very end." Sunny blinked. "Wait, seriously?" A strangely sad smile appeared on her lips. "In my first nightmare, I was the daughter of a lighthouse keeper. My family lived in a beautiful tower on the shore of a beautiful sea. Every morning, the warm sun rose from beyond the horizon, bathing the endless expanse of azure waves in beautiful light. The winds were gentle and the world was kind. It was me, my parents, and my younger siblings. We lived together in harmony, humbly but needing for nothing." He frowned. "And then what?" "A sea serpent destroyed the lighthouse. Some rotten horror rose from the depths." Changing Star's eyes became distant. A few moments passed before she spoke again. "No, nothing happened. That was the point of it, I think. My nightmare. It was actually a paradise. It was everything I dreamed about when I was a little kid. Only much more wondrous and human than I could have ever imagined." Sunny looked at her in utter shock. As he watched, the hint of sorrow disappeared from Neff's face, replaced by a subtly harsh expression. But that was what made it so hard to overcome. Impossible even, just like you said. Because all I had to do to conquer the nightmare. All I had to do was to walk away and leave it all behind, knowing that I could just stay there in that paradise. Forever. He hesitated for a while, then asked cautiously, "So what did you do?" A heavy sigh escaped from Neff's lips. Her eyes grew dim. "I searched for a way out of the nightmare for a long time. But no matter how hard I looked, there wasn't any. Day after day, night after night. As time went by, it became harder and harder to force myself to continue searching. I grew accustomed to that bliss, that warm and beautiful life. And eventually a day came when I thought that maybe I should stop. Maybe I can just stay." She tilted her head slightly and said, her tantalizing voice reaching the deepest, darkest parts of his heart, "That was the day I went to the top of the lighthouse. You see, Sunny, you have to light yourself on fire, to rip the blessings of the fire. That was what my grandmother used to say. So that was what I did. I doused myself in oil, and set myself aflame." The white flames suddenly licked her hands and she stared at them, her face slowly turning pale, her eyes reflecting the terrible agony she felt. As her ivory skin continuously boiled, darkened, and then healed to become pristine again, she said simply, "And I burned." Suddenly, the flames disappeared and she made a fist. Her voice grew a little strained. "And after a long, long time, when all of it was over, I found myself in a dark cave, nestled in a slimy cocoon of black silk. All around me, thousands upon thousands of people were sleeping in similar cocoons with their eyes open, with happy smiles on their empty faces. And above us was a creature so revolting and abhorrent that I can't bring myself to describe it to this day. It was feeding on our dreams." She grew quiet for a bit and then added, "That creature was convulsing in pain, as though it shared in the agony I felt too. Somehow I managed to break free of the cocoon and kill it before it fully regained its senses." She glanced at him and smiled. However, there was no warmth in that smile. "That was how I conquered my first nightmare." Sunny looked her in the eyes for a long time, silent. Then he slowly turned away. "Just as I said, the stuff of nightmares. I guess we call them that for a reason." Changing Star laughed. "I guess. But really, fighting that terror wasn't the hardest part. Waking up trapped in a repulsive cocoon wasn't the hardest part. Even burning alive wasn't the hardest part." She grew silent for a few moments and then said, looking at the white road beneath their feet, "The hardest part was walking up the steps to the top of the lighthouse. not because of what waited for me in the future, but because of what I was leaving in the past. Soon, the familiar shapes of the outer settlement appeared in their sight. They had finally returned to the bright castle. Chapter 287 Lonely Star. The outer settlement had changed from the time Sunny saw it last. At the point where the white road widened into the vast platform that the settlement stood upon, a tall stone barricade was built, with watchful sentries observing the approach to the crest of the hill. Each of them was wielding a memory weapon and sturdy armor, their faces full of dark determination. The makeshift watchtower constructed on the roof of Nef's lodge loomed above them, with several archers ready to rain arrows on any nightmare creature that wandered close. The slum itself was much the same, but the people populating it seemed different. Many of them were bruised and bandaged, but their eyes shone with the subtle light of hope that wasn't there or as strong before. That hope was contrasted against the suffocating feeling of tension that hung in the air. From time to time, someone would glance toward the castle and frown, a dark expression appearing on their face. There was another detail that surprised Sunny. On the sleeves of many slum dwellers, a piece of pure white cloth was tied, as if announcing their allegiance to some god or goddess. There had been none of that when he left this place a few months ago. There were also graffiti drawn on the walls of the most derelict hovels, some of them depicting a shining star, some the image of a beautiful bronze spear. What is that all about? The white armbands and the star were, obviously, meant to represent Nephi's. But when had Effie suddenly become an apostle? Glancing at the voracious huntress, he raised an eyebrow. Anything you want to tell me? She scratched the back of her head, then shrugged. I've become a bit of a folk hero, apparently. Sunny shook his head and didn't press the issue. Whatever. When the sentries saw who was approaching, their faces first became shocked and then lighted up with intense jubilation. Lady Nephis. It's changing star. Lady Nephis has returned. She is alive. The hum of voices spread through the entire settlement in an instant. If Gunlog had not known that they were back in the Dark City, he would have learned of it now. But he knew, of course. He knew it long before the people of the slum ever laid their eyes on their supposed savior. Sunny looked past the outer settlement, at the mighty walls of the bright castle. How long before its lord throws them a welcome party? Soon, the cohort was surrounded by a crowd of exhilarated people. Everyone wanted to see that Saint Nephis was alive and well with their own eyes. The other members were bathing in attention too, especially Effie. Effie! Huntress Athena! Welcome home, Effie. Show them. The huntress grinned in bewilderment and kept quiet. In the crowd, there were a few faces that did not share in everyone's joy. They were the leaders of the outer settlement's hunting parties. The gazes they threw at Nephis were grim and full of meaning. She gave them a nod, letting the experienced hunters know that she understood the message they were trying to relay. Then, Changing Star faced the inhabitants of the slum and took the bag that Effie handed her. Slowly unclasping it, she spoke, her calm voice effortlessly making the crowd grow silent. I am not good with words, so please accept my gratitude, dreamers of the Dark City. The past few months have been harsh on me and the members of my cohort, but they must have been equally as harsh on you. However, we have persevered. You here in these cursed ruins, and we out there in the ghastly depths of the labyrinth. But all of it was not in vain. With that, she took something from the bag and tossed it to the ground. Suddenly, a deathly silence settled over the crowd. Everyone was staring at the object lying on the stones, expressions of fear clearly written on many faces. It was a terrifying, jagged black talon, which was as sharp and long as a sword. And then, another one fell near it, and another and another. Eventually, 38 of these dark blades lay in a pile in front of Nephis, 30 from the 6 front limbs of the spire messenger and 8 from the 2 hind ones. Closing the bag, Nephis put it on her shoulder and said, her tone dark and piercing, out there in the labyrinth, we have fought and slew one of the cursed messengers of the Crimson Spire. I bring you its claws as a gift, to become your weapons. Stunned whispers ran through the crowd. The messengers were both a symbol of terror and a symbol of hope to the people of the Dark City, terror because of their horrifying power and appetite, as well as their connection to the dreaded spire, and hope because of the legends that once, a long time ago, a group of powerful sleepers had managed to kill one. And now, the legend came alive right in front of their eyes. Nephi's lingered for a moment and then sighed, a somber note appearing in her voice. Many years ago we, those who were sent to the forgotten shore, weren't yet imprisoned by fear, enthralled by the sin of those cowards who had forgotten that they are, first and forever, humans. Back then, there were people among us willing to risk their lives to conquer this hell, escape it. The First Lord and his companions were the greatest of them. And now, brilliant sparks of light suddenly appeared around her head like a sacred halo. Changing Star's eyes shined with pure white radiance, and as the crown of dawn weaved itself from light and fell upon her head, she spoke. She didn't rise or even strain her voice, but the impact of her words only grew because of it. I have brought his legacy back to the Dark City. This is the crown of the First Lord. We have retrieved it from a place of eternal darkness where he had fallen in battle. He died trying to find a way out of this cursed land for all of us to follow. She paused for a moment and then said, her face illuminated by the brilliant white flames that burned in her furious eyes. On her forehead, the single gem decorating the dawn shard shone with that brilliance too, almost like a third eye. And with it, we will finish what he started. Chapter 288 Progress Report. Sometime later, they entered the stone lodge and found themselves in the middle of another smaller crowd. Around 30 or 40 people gathered in the main hall of Changing Star's dwelling, making it look even smaller than it had before. However, these were not just any sleepers from the slum. Most of them were experienced fighters from the outer settlement few hunting parties, as well as people who Nephis had recruited into her faction during her time in the Dark City. Back when Sunny had been a part of the group, they were weak and hopeless young men and women who were barely surviving in the cruel reality of the Forgotten Shore. Now things changed. Neph's little helpers were armed with makeshift weapons and wearing armors fashioned from a wide variety of scavenged materials, while some were even in possession of memories. They also held themselves very differently from before. Honestly, the difference between them and the hunters was not that big now. If Sunny didn't know which were which, he might have mistaken one for the other. Changing Star walked through the crowd and approached the window that opened on the bleak view of the cursed ruins. She looked at it for a short moment, and then turned around, a dark expression on her face. Tell me. The leaders of the hunting parties glanced at each other. One of them, a stocky young man with long messy hair and 3 ugly scars running all the way from his forehead to his chin, spoke with a bit of uncertainty. Welcome back, Lady Nephis. It is good that you are alive and well. She gave him a nod. The hunter paused, then continued, his voice somber. We, have followed your orders and advice for these past months. The militia you created has been reinforced and organized to protect the settlement from the attacking monsters. With the memories you and your cohort hunted for us in the ruins, the casualties were low both among the watchmen and among the civilians. Compared to before, I mean. Changing Star remained silent and just stared at him. The young man sighed. About the other thing, it went almost exactly how you told us it would. Members of the host came into the settlement shortly after your departure, demanding that Effie surrender herself to be judged for the disappearance of those guards. When we told them that she was gone, they got violent. Several people were injured, but no one died. Effie scoffed. The hunted gave her a complicated look and scratched his cheek. After that, they would come again every week or so, hurt a few people and break things, always with the same demand. But we kept our cool and just, well, took it, like you told us to do. That seemed to only make them angrier, but they had no real reason to escalate things. In the end, they just settled for making our lives difficult and pushing people around. The tall huntress shook her head. What's with the people foaming at their mouths to greet me? What's that really about? The young man looked down in embarrassment and cleared his throat. Well, you see, the more the castle proclaimed that you have to answer for the murder of those guards, the more people in the settlement became, how do I say this, appreciative of you. Effie looked at him with a perplexed expression. Because I am being unjustly accused. He smiled sheepishly. Ah no, actually the opposite. They really appreciate the fact that you had, allegedly, killed half a dozen guards. In fact, their only regret is that they didn't kill more. There are tales about how exactly you dealt with them, too, one more colorful than the other. The most popular one is that, the guards wanted to rob you of your, honor, so that's why you had to teach the castle folks a lesson. The tall huntress blinked. My honor? Since when do I have honor? The young man grinned. Hey, don't look at me. I did not come up with this one, alright? Blame Park, it was his idea. Effie looked darkly at another hunter, who just shrugged. Lady Nephice told us to do our best to make people in the settlement root for you. It worked, did it not? The unruly huntress rubbed her face with an exasperated expression. But I didn't kill them, though. The hunter looked at her with no humor in his eyes. Who cares? Effie opened her mouth to say something, but Nephice interrupted her. Time is short. Don't waste it on useless chatter. Then she turned to the hunter with scars on his face and asked, "What about my last instruction?" He frowned, then took out a small wooden box from a leather pouch tied to his belt. The young man held the little box like it was the most terrible nightmare creature. Handling it with extreme caution, he approached Nephice and handed it to her. There were drops of sweat on his forehead. This is what the person from the castle brought. I don't know what they used to make Hyde create that thing, but the result was exactly as you wished, at least according to the note they left. He hesitated. The box and the note simply appeared on my pillow one day. I almost died of a heart attack when I read what that thing is supposed to be. Sunny stared at the box with interest. Hyde was one of Gunlog's lieutenants, a young woman in charge of the artisans. Her aspect ability allowed her to manipulate certain qualities of plants, which was of tremendous use here on the Forgotten Shore, where the food was scarce and monotonous. But what could Nephice want from her that was so important? And why was the hunter so scared of the little box? Carefully taking it, Changing Star looked at the box for a few moments, and then handed it to Castor. You know what to do. With a short nod, Castor walked toward the door and disappeared. Nephice, meanwhile, turned to the hunters and said in a steady tone, You did well. Thank you all. As wide smiles appeared on their faces, she took Effie's bottomless bag and opened it once again. Turning the bag upside down, Changing Star said, This is not a reward, nor is it a gift. This is just something that all of you deserve, and going to need very soon. A moment later, a river of glimmering crystals flowed from the bag, scattering on the table's surface. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, each shining with subtle, alluring light. Soon, the crystal spilled over the edges of the table and fell to the floor. A few moments later, more than 1,000 soul shards appeared before the stunned people who were gathered in the room. The bottomless bag finally ran empty. Sunny stared at the tall pile of shining crystals and sighed. Back before all of this had started, he had a pile like that of his own. Only much, much smaller. His pride and joy. It was all gone now, sadly. What a sight. And I thought I was rich. Chapter 289, Start of the play. Back in the labyrinth, Sunny wasn't the only one who had killed countless nightmare creatures. In fact, due to his primary role as a scout, the 3 main fighters of the cohort had killed many more. He knew for a fact that at least 2 of them, Effie and Castor, had fully saturated their soul cores long before their return journey was finished. Absorbing any more shards would have been useless for them. At some point, Nephice had begun to abstain from consuming her share of the spoils too. Added to the shards that Sunny traded for the unwanted memories that the members of the cohort had accumulated, a truly incredible amount of the alluring crystals had been placed into Effie's leather bag. He had often wondered what Nephice would use them for, and now he had his answer. The people gathered in the main hall of the hunting lodge, her most trusted subordinates, stared at the tall pile of soul shards in utter shock. Here in the Dark City, this was an inconceivable wealth. 1 shard was enough to buy a person a week of food, comfort, and safety behind the tall walls of the bright castle. Too many had died because they lacked these things. So, in a sense, the mountain of crystals in front of them was tantamount to 1,000 human lives. The scarred hunter slowly tore his eyes away from the glittering shards and looked at Changing Star. His face pale and his voice suddenly raspy. What is this, Lady Nephis?" She remained silent for a few moments, and then said in her even reserved, strangely affecting voice, "This is for you, to nourish yourselves and grow stronger. You are going to need every bit of strength for what awaits us in the days to come." The young man watched her, a dangerous flame slowly igniting in his eyes, a flame of resolve, adoration, almost worship. Hidden in a shadowy corner, Sunny smiled with dark apprehension. Back at the start of it all, he had told Nephis that Gunlog could not be defeated because he controlled every facet of life here in the Dark City. Food, safety, hope, and fear. Even power itself. Then, he had watched as she gave the people of the outer settlement free food, placed them under the protection of her sword, and ignited the embers of the long-forgotten hope in their hearts. All that remained was power. And now she had brought them power as well. No wonder they were ready to worship her. In their eyes, Changing Star was a noble savior. No one knew that their messiah was a counterfeit one. Glancing at the stunned people, Effie sighed and took her bag from Neff's hands. Looking inside the empty memory with a bit of a sad expression, she said, "What are you waiting for? Gunlog's men are probably already arming themselves to come here and break your thick skulls. Share the shards among yourselves and absorb them, dimwits." The sleepers did not make her say it twice. Not long after the last shard had been absorbed, one of the watchers ran into the room, breathing heavily. "Coming! They are coming!" There was a hint of unrestrained fear in her voice. Sunny flexed his shoulders and stretched. "The show is about to start." The people gathered in the room glanced at each other, their faces full of tension. Only Nephis remained indifferent, watching out of the window at the dead city that sprawled below her like a desolate, lonesome graveyard. "Stay calm, everyone." Her voice settled them down. The hunter with scars on his face turned to Changing Star, a deep frown on his face. After hesitating for a few moments, he said, But, they are coming to take Effie. We can't allow that to happen. I'm done watching good people be taken into the damn castle and never return. If they want to make an example out of her, like they did with Jubii. Over my dead body." The hum of angry voices rose in the hall, accompanied by heated glares. "Exactly. They will pay for Jubii's death. Your dead body. Why not their dead bodies?" Nephis lingered for a moment, then turned to them. A slight smile appeared on her face. "Don't worry. Nothing is going to happen to Effie. You have my word." That seemed to calm them down a little. It seemed as though they were willing to believe anything she said, regardless of how impossible her promises were. Was that the definition of blind faith? Before anyone could answer, however, a crashing sound came from the direction of the entrance to the stone lodge. It seemed as though someone had just smashed through the door. There was a short scream, which quickly grew silent. Something fell on the floor. Then the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard, drawing closer to the hall where all the people had gathered. A few moments later, its door was shattered too, exploding into a shower of splinters along with the bits of stone that surrounded it. A giant of a man walked into the hall, his mere presence making the entire space look tiny. Compared to him, even Effie seemed to be of average height. There was a morose expression on his face and a dark glint in his cold, cruel eyes. The giant did not wear any armor, allowing his monumental muscles to strain the fabric of a sleeveless silk shirt. It appeared that Tessai, the fearsome leader of the castle guard, had decided to welcome the cohort back to the Dark City himself. Neff's followers paled, their fiery indignation replaced by fear. "What a monster," Sunny thought indifferently, pondering on what the quickest way to kill the morose giant would be. Behind Tessai, a group of guards, each wearing sturdy armor and wielding memory weapons, could be seen. Their eyes were immediately drawn to the robust figure of the tall huntress, and then hateful smiles appeared on their faces. The guards seemed very happy to finally find the woman accused of murdering their own. The giant only glanced at Effie and then turned to Nephi's. His deep, low voice resounded in the stone hall, sending shivers running through the hearts of many sleepers gathered there. Changing star. So you're alive after all. She met his gaze and endured it without flinching. You must be Tessai. To what do I owe the pleasure? The giant lingered before answering. The corner of his mouth twitched and slowly curled upward. Finally he said, "Oh no. The pleasure is all mine." Then he raised his mighty arm and pointed at Effie. "Lord Gunlog has invited this one to the castle, to face punishment for her crimes. You should have trained your dogs better, Changing Star. See what happens when they go around biting people." He lowered his hand and flexed his shoulders, then looked at her with a dark expression. "Now, I would advise you rats to step aside and let me take that she-wolf with me." Nephis crossed her arms and stared at the giant, cold sparks igniting in the depths of her calm gray eyes. A few moments later she said evenly, "Or what?" Chapter 290 Judgment Day. Changing Star's words brought the room to dead silence. On both sides of it, people were slowly preparing themselves, dark resentment burning in their eyes. It felt as though the tension reached critical mass and was about to explode into a storm of violence. Only 3 people remained calm and unaffected by the direness of the situation. Nephis herself, Sunny, and Tessai. The giant bared his canines in a grin. His eyes, however, remained cold as ice. "What a revelation. And here I was, thinking that you are a great defender of justice. Were you not, Changing Star? Or is your sense of justice reserved only for the crimes of those who don't serve you?" He sighed and added, his voice full of disappointment, "That huntress of yours is accused of murder. Why are you trying to prevent me from bringing her to justice? I thought that you, of all people, would not get in the way of fairness." Nephis frowned. "Accused does not mean convicted. Why do you claim that she is guilty?" Tessai stared at her and said, his low voice sending tremors through the stone hall, "There is plenty of evidence. There are plenty of witnesses. So many people came forward to give a testimony. Her guilt is undeniable. How will you answer that, Changing Star?" Sunny smiled slightly. "How peculiar. So many people apparently saw Effie slaughter those fools. Did I imagine killing them or what? I was a bit crazy at the time, to be fair." "Ha!" Before Nephis could answer, Kai suddenly took a step forward and shouted, "That is impossible." However, she made him stop with a stern look. The charming young man hesitated, then gritted his teeth and fell silent, glaring at Tessai with burning indignation. Changing Star turned to the imposing giant and smiled. Well, that changes everything then. Please forgive me if you can. I have been away from the Dark City for so long, and wasn't informed of these developments. If this is the case, then by all means take her away." Effie grimaced and looked at her with an amused expression. Sunny did not take his eyes off of Tessai, however. His shadow stared at Nephis too. The smile suddenly disappeared from her face, replaced by boundless coldness. "However, I am coming with her. All of us are, in fact. We are awfully curious to see that evidence and hear those witnesses. And most of all, we are all dying to see justice done and those guilty punished. Surely Lord Gunlog would not mind." An expression of dissatisfaction appeared on Tessai's face. With a deep frown, he looked down on Neph from his oppressive height and said in a growling voice, "Why do you think that you can come, wench?" Changing Star was silent for a few moments, calmly looking at him. Then, her eyes suddenly shone with furious white light. In a voice that promised agony and death, she said with contempt, "Who's going to stop me?" The giant stared at her with a complicated expression. It seemed as though he was being torn between pride and fear. It was all a mask, though. A masterful performance to hide his true emotions, triumph and jubilation. He had come here with the excuse of bringing Effie to justice, but his true goal had always been Nephis. She was the one Gunlog wanted to destroy. And now, she was bringing herself to him, like a lamb going to slaughter. What Tessai did not know was that Changing Star was as far from a lamb as one could be. More like a demon in sheep's clothing. Sunny glanced at the morose giant with something that resembled pity. Meanwhile, Tessai slowly shook his head and said, his voice full of false reluctance, "Fine. Do as you wish. Come with me to the castle if you want. Bring your rats with you. All of you will witness the brilliance of our Lord." All together they exited the lodge. Tessai was walking in the front, holding the tall huntress by the shoulder. Her hands were tied behind her back with a flimsy rope, more of a symbolic gesture than a real restraint, considering Effie's strength. Nephice was keeping close, her face calm and indifferent. The guards and the members of Changing Star's faction were right behind them, throwing menacing looks at each other. Their faces were grim and full of resentful indignation. Sunny had hidden himself in the crowd, not wishing to draw any attention. Now he was moving with it, feeling the restless agitation through the chaotic movement of the surrounding shadows. As they moved toward the castle, more and more slum dwellers surrounded them, their faces full of shock and anger. "They got Effie. Bastards! Let her go. Lady Nephice, do something." Glancing at the growing number of people who were gathering around them, she smiled reassuringly and said, "Stay calm. Come with us if you want. Today we'll see justice done." However, her appeal to remain calm had the opposite effect on the crowd. It ignited it instead, and soon a clamor of shouts rose above the outer settlement. "Justice! Justice!" However, at some point, the tone of it changed, an almost palpable sense of bloodlust finding its way into the people's voices. The word they were shouting was also replaced, and soon the crowd was chanting something else, calling not for justice but for judgment. Judgment! Judgment! Sunny observed the raging beast of the human crowd with a troubled frown. A cold, familiar emotion grasped his heart. He knew this sickening feeling all too well. It was the same way he felt when facing frenzied nightmare creatures. Hell! As they drew close to the stairs leading to the entrance of the castle, almost 100 people were following them. The guards standing at the gates stared at the crowd with a bit of fear in their eyes. And at some point, Castor appeared out of nowhere and took position right behind Nephice. The proud legacy looked pale and a bit disheveled, but it seemed that he had managed to complete the mysterious task given to him by Changing Star without receiving any wounds. A few moments later, they entered the bright castle.